Welcome to Mr. Edmonds' classroom today. Today we're going to explore the events leading to the outbreak of armed conflict between the American colonies and Great Britain. And before we start there, we're going to kind of go back to see how the colonists were living in the 13 colonies. The 13 colonies began being colonized and settled in 1620 of Jamestown, that's Virginia, and then up until the 13th colony, which is Georgia, in 1732. So you can see a 100-year time span of the 13 colonies being formed, different people coming for different reasons. Jamestown was the first elective legislative body in the 13 colonies, the House of Burgesses, where a group of men began their own self-government to establish and make things more agreeable for themselves and happier as they came to the 13 colonies. And another one was the Mayflower Compact, which is the Puritans who came across the ocean escaping persecution, and they signed this compact to make themselves their own kind of government away from Great Britain as well. And so these are two of the first forms of self-government in the 13 colonies that kind of set the foreground for the Founding Fathers. The Albany Plan was a plan created by Benjamin Franklin to help tax the colonists so that they could fend off the Indians on the frontier. But when Benjamin Franklin and the other delegates returned to their colonies, the colonies did not ratify it at all. So that plan did not work out. And after the war, when Great Britain had accrued a large debt in helping protect us as their subjects, they decided to give us part of the debt by taxing us. But before they taxed us, we as citizens or subjects of Great Britain thought we had fought this war to get part of the Ohio Territory or to get part of the land east of the Mississippi and west of the Appalachian Mountains. But instead of that, we were given a proclamation called the Proclamation of 1763. And that said that we cannot settle anywhere west of the Appalachian Mountains. And that infuriated the colonists. They wanted more land. They thought we fought the war for that land. And we didn't actually. But that was the first thing that kind of infuriated the colonists. In 1764, the Sugar Act was enacted, and this made it possible for more enforcement of the previous Molasses Act in the 1730s that Britain had enforced on the colonists, but the colonists had eluded that act with their kind of smuggling and not very desirable of tax ways. And so the colonists were given this new tax on sugar, molasses, beer, and other kind of products, and it infuriated us. And also, we were given the Quartering Act in 1764, which is where British troops who were now here because of the proclamation of 1763, and also because they were trying to fend off the Indians and the potential threat from Canada of the French, they thought about quartering all of their troops in our houses to save money, and we had to accommodate that. And that also infuriated all of the colonists. Would you like to have a military person in your house every day, give them food? Maybe for a few days, but not for every single day of your life. So that was also one way that aggravated the colonists. And after that, the next year, the Stamp Act was enacted. This was, to top it all off, the worst of them all, they thought. It put a tax on all press, all printed items, newspapers, stamps, and a few of the delegates from the colonies met together at a Stamp Act Congress, or First Congress of the American Colonies. It was a meeting held between October 7th and the 25th in 1765 in New York City, consisting of representatives from some of the British colonies in North America, and it was the first gathering of elected representatives from the several of the American colonies to devise a unified protest against new British taxation. After the French and Indian War, Parliament's laws and acts they passed did not impress the colonists, but each one further drove them to call for revolution. The colonists had already had their own kind of freedom with their own militias, with their own legislative bodies, with their own private enterprises. So when Britain wanted to impose acts and the proclamation on them and enforce their rules and make more restrictions, they were infuriated because they already had this kind of freedom and they didn't want to lose this freedom. They're American. It's very important to realize that this was not just a revolution, but more of a civil war. And we will go in next week into more about this revolution and the events leading up to it, like the Boston Massacre, Tea Party, and eventually the shot heard around the world.